Hello, this is Tom Weber. I want to thank you for joining me once again for day 2 of my series of meditations for Advent. And today I wanted to share with you a passage from the writings of Henri Nouwen, who was a Dutch Catholic priest and also a professor, writer, and theologian. And his spiritual writings, much like that of Thomas Merton, have been immensely popular, and with good reason. Now, if you listened to yesterday's meditation, you will recall that we explored the connection between the season of Advent and the theme of waiting. And today I'm going to share with you a reading from an article that Henri Nouwen wrote in 1993 called The Spirituality of Waiting. And in this article, he paints a picture for us of what it means to be an Advent person of waiting. And he does this by painting a portrait of 3 figures from the Christmas story found in Luke's Gospel, who each exemplify what it means to be an Advent person of waiting. Those are the persons of Zechariah, Elizabeth, and Mary. So I invite you to just sit back, and you might want to close your eyes and listen prayerfully and attentively as his words wash over you. And I think you will be struck at how his words resonate with us today as we are in the midst of a pandemic and a time of economic and political uncertainty. So here we go. Nouwen writes, "Waiting is not a very popular attitude. Waiting's not something that people think about with great sympathy. In fact, most people consider waiting a waste of time. Perhaps this is because the culture in which we live is basically saying, get going, do something, show that you're able to make a difference. Don't just sit there and wait." For many people, waiting is an awful desert between where they are and where they want to go. And people do not like such a place. They want to get out of it by doing something. In our particular historical situation, waiting is even more difficult because we are so fearful. One of the most pervasive emotions in the atmosphere around us is fear. People are afraid of inner feelings, afraid of other people, and also afraid of the future. Fearful people have a hard time waiting, because when we're afraid, we want to get away from where we are. But if we cannot flee, we might fight instead. Many of our destructive acts come from a fear that something harmful will be done to us. And if we take a broader perspective, that not only individuals but whole communities and nations might be afraid of being harmed, we can understand how hard it is to wait and how tempting it is to act. Here are the roots of a first strike approach to others. People who live in a world of fear are more likely to make aggressive, hostile, destructive responses than people who are not frightened. The more afraid we are, the harder waiting becomes. And that is why waiting is such an unpopular attitude for many people. It impresses me, therefore, that all the figures who appear in the first pages of Luke's Gospel are waiting. Zechariah and Elizabeth are waiting. Mary is waiting. Simeon and Anna, who were there at the temple when Jesus was brought in, are all waiting. The whole opening scene of the Good News is filled with waiting people. And right at the beginning, all these people in some way or another hear the words, "Do not be afraid. I have something good to say to you." These words set the tone and the context. Now Zechariah and Elizabeth, Mary, Simeon, and Anna are all waiting for something new and good to happen to them. And who are these figures? They are representatives of the waiting Israel. The Psalms are full of this attitude. My soul is waiting for the Lord. I count on His word. My soul is longing for the Lord more than a watchman for daybreak. Because with the Lord there is mercy and fullness of redemption. That's from Psalm 130, verses 5 through 7. My soul is waiting for the Lord. That is the song that reverberates all through the Hebrew Scriptures. But not all who dwell in Israel are waiting. In fact, we might say that the prophets criticized the people, at least in part, for giving up their attentiveness to what was coming. Waiting finally became the attitude of the remnant of Israel, of that small group of Israelites that remained faithful. The prophet Zephaniah says, "In your midst I will leave a humble and lowly people, and those who are left in Israel will seek refuge in the name of Yahweh. They will do no wrong, will tell no lies, and the perjured tongue will no longer be found in their mouths." A quote from Zephaniah 3, verses 12 to 13. It is the purified remnant of faithful people who are waiting. Elizabeth and Zechariah, Mary and Simeon are each representatives of that remnant. They have been able to wait, to be attentive, to live expectantly. But what is the nature of waiting? What is the practice of waiting? How are they waiting? And how are we called to wait with them? Waiting, as we see it in the people on the first pages of the Gospel, is waiting with a sense of promise. Zechariah, your wife Elizabeth is to bear you a son. Mary, listen, you are to conceive and bear a son. Quotes from Luke 1:13 and verse 31. People who wait have received a promise that allows them to wait. They have received something that is at work in them, like a seed that started to grow. This is very important. We can only really wait if what we are waiting for has already begun in us. So waiting is never a movement from nothing to something. It's always a movement from something to something more. Zechariah, Mary, and Elizabeth were living with a promise that nurtured them, that fed them, and that made them able to stay where they were. And in this way, the promise itself could grow in them and for them. Second, waiting is active. Most of us think of waiting as something very passive, a hopeless state determined by events totally out of our hands. The bus is late? Well, you cannot do anything about it, so you just have to sit there and just wait. It is not difficult to understand the irritation people feel when someone says, "Just wait." Words like that seem to push us into passivity. But there is none of this passivity in Scripture. Those who are waiting very actively. They know that what they are waiting for is growing from the ground on which they are standing. That's the secret. The secret of waiting is the faith that the seed has been planted, that something has begun, Active waiting means to be present fully to the moment, and the conviction that something is happening where you are, and that you want to be present to it. A waiting person is someone who is present to the moment, who believes that this moment is the moment. A waiting person is a patient person. The word patience means the willingness to stay where you are and live in the situation out to the full in the belief that something hidden there will manifest itself to us. Impatient people are always expecting the real thing to happen somewhere else and therefore want to go somewhere else. The moment is empty. But patient people dare to stay where they are. Patient living means to live actively in the present and wait there. Waiting, then, is not passive. It involves nurturing the moment, as a mother nurtures the child that is growing in her. Zechariah, Elizabeth, and Mary were very present to the moment. That is why they could hear the angel. They were alert, attentive to the voice that spoke to them and said, "Don't be afraid. Something is happening to you. Pay attention." But there is more. Waiting is open-ended. Open-ended waiting is hard for us because we tend to wait for something very concrete, for something that we wish to have. Much of our waiting is filled with wishes. I wish that I would have a job. I wish that the weather were better. I wish that the pain would go. We are full of wishes, and our waiting easily gets entangled in those wishes. For this reason, a lot of our waiting is not open-ended. Instead, our waiting is a way of controlling the future. We want the future to go in a very specific direction. And if this does not happen, we're disappointed and can even slip into despair. That is why we have such a hard time waiting. We want to do the things that will make the desired events take place. Here we can see how wishes tend to be connected with fears. But Zechariah, Elizabeth, and Mary were not filled with wishes. They were filled with hope. Hope is something very different. Hope is trusting that something will be fulfilled, but fulfilled according to the promises and not just according to our wishes. Therefore, hope is always open-ended. I found it very important in my own life to let go of my wishes and start hoping. It was only when I was willing to let go of wishes that something really new, something beyond my own expectations could happen to me. Just imagine what Mary was actually saying in the words, "I am the handmaid of the Lord. Let what you have said be done to me." She was saying, I don't know what this all means, but I trust that good things will happen. She trusted so deeply that her waiting was open to all possibilities. And she did not want to control them. She believed that when she listened carefully, she could trust what was going to happen. To wait open-endedly is an enormously radical attitude toward life. So as to trust that something will happen to us that's far beyond our own imaginings. So too is giving up control over our future and letting God define our life. Trusting that God molds us according to God's love and not according to our fear. The spiritual life is a life in which we wait. actively present to the moment, trusting that new things will happen to us, new things that are far beyond our own imagination, fantasy, or prediction. And that indeed is a very radical stance toward life in a world preoccupied with control. This concludes my reading of Henri Nouwen's article. And I hope that you will take some time to prayerfully reflect on what you have heard. And I want to invite you to join me again tomorrow for another Advent reflection. And God bless you and thank you for your time. And I hope you will join me once again tomorrow for another Advent meditation.